Namaste mera dosto, Elizabeth Thakur here. Hope everything is going well for all of you. Why Hindu temples should be free. This is what we will talk about today. Right now, we all know that temples are not free in India, even though other religious institutions have lots of freedom. This is absolutely ridiculous and unjust. This is one of the biggest obstacles for Hindus because with Hindu temples being helpless with no proper funding, other religious institutions are free to use this to their advantage. So let's go ahead and watch it. All those who are new, kindly subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to receive notifications of my latest videos. I need the support of all Dharma warriors.
Tomorrow, the government decides that notwithstanding the fact that this is a privately run institution, we will tell you how you're supposed to run your place. Would that be acceptable to you? How are we so comfortable with the state interfering with our temples? When you ask for freedom of Hindu religious institutions from state control, you're not making a statement against any other community. You're not attacking any other faith. You're only attacking the state for its hypocrisy. What happens when the state chooses to drive a wedge between two different communities? By making one community the subject of exercise of its control, uses its resources in the name of secularism to feather everybody else's nest. Why do I have to pay money to have access to the deity? It is the state which has imposed payment-based queue system across the board in all temples. But who takes the blame for this? The community takes the blame and the institution takes the blame for being money-minded. Have you ever wondered why is it that this institution and communities associated with this institution have been the subject of repetitive attacks whenever there's been an invasion or whenever there have been attempts at conversions? Demonize indigenous traditions, call them the devil, call them the Satan, shame them when it comes to their traditions and beliefs. And when the cup is empty and it has been emptied of local thought, you fill it with foreign thought. Dahi handi is out on its way. Firecrackers during Diwali is out on its way. God knows what else will find an exit option. Change is constant and change is good. That's what Bhagavad Gita says. But you have to decide whether it is change for the good or change for the worse. When your house help needs money, or when your security guard needs money, or when your driver needs money, please realize he is in a vulnerable position where he has opened himself up for predatory proselytization and conversion. There is no point in blaming the outsider or someone who doesn't belong to your faith as long as there are weaknesses within your own community. You can blame the thief for having the intent of entering your house, but keeping your house open without a lock is your problem, it's your mistake. You need to free Hindu institutions from state control. Beneficiaries of this particular goal will ultimately be the middle class Hindu, the low middle class Hindu, and Hindus who live below the poverty line. I'm not a religious person. I can't call myself a religious person. I'm not particularly devout. I don't go to temples frequently. I don't participate in religious rituals. Not that I'm an atheist. It's just that I'm not irreligious either. It's just that I perhaps don't have the interest or the inclination. But thanks to my upbringing, I would certainly call myself as someone who is cultural. I see a lot of value in culture. I see a lot of value in holding on to your roots to some extent, because that is what gives you your identity. One of the pet peeves that I have chosen for myself over the last few years is to free temples from government control. Most people assume that this is an elitist cause. Most people assume that the cause of the temple is effectively the cause of the Brahmin, or it is the cause of one caste or one community. As far as I'm concerned, that institution belongs to everyone who falls within the Hindu fold. And therefore, if you're trying to free temples from government control, you're not fighting the cause of one particular caste or community, but you're fighting the cause for an entire faith, for an entire value system, for a group of communities, so to speak. India is a secular country. Is that the assumption? Yes or no? At least on paper. If it is a secular institution, if it is a secular country, therefore the state is supposed to maintain a distance from religious institutions. Yes or no? Yes. If that is the answer, isn't the state supposed to maintain a distance from all religious institutions? Therefore, the amount of control that the state exercises over religious institutions of different faiths must be at least similar or the same. Yes. Do you have an endowments board for mosques? Do you have an endowments ministry for churches? Do you have an endowments ministry for gurudwaras? Do you have an endowments ministry for synagogues in this country? Then why do you have an endowments ministry for only Hindu religious institutions? By having a dedicated ministry that chooses to exercise control over the religious institutions of only one faith, either you're violating the concept of secularism after claiming for yourself this concept called secularism, that you're a secular country, or while you call yourself a secular country, you operate like a Hindu state, because a state that interferes with Hindu institutions can only do so if it believes that it is Hindu in character. These are the only two options available to you. So either embrace your Hindu character and yet treat everybody equally, or remain true to the concept of secularism and stay equidistant from all institutions. If you choose to straddle on both the boats, you don't do justice to either of the boats. That is the simple concept. When you ask for freedom of Hindu religious institutions from state control, you're not making a statement against any other community. You're not attacking any other faith. You're only attacking the state for its hypocrisy. Ask any member of my generation, or perhaps this age bracket of 18 to 25, and you ask them, what is it about a temple that you hate the most? The one thing that comes out automatically as an instinctive response or an intuitive response, you have to pay money for some of these queues. Why do I have to pay money to have access to the deity? Why do you have these special lines? Why do you have these special queues? But then you ask them, so who has imposed this structure? Who has imposed this rule? Most people won't even be aware of the fact that it is the state which has imposed payment-based queue system across the board in all temples. So if you go to some of the popular temples in Tamil Nadu, today a payment-based queue system has gone to the extent where if you need a special darshan, you need to pay close to 2,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees, or 5,000 rupees. Are you aware of this temple called the Subramania Swami temple in Tiruchendur? Very popular. It's on the beach. From 500 rupees to 700 rupees, now the special queue system has gone to 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000. The community is rebelling, but the state continues to impose that particular structure. But who takes the blame for this? The community takes the blame, and the institution takes the blame for being money-minded. What happens when the state chooses to drive a wedge between two different communities by making one community the subject of exercise of its control, uses its resources in the name of secularism to feather everybody else's nest? How is it that when it comes to these resources, it is everybody's money? I'm sorry if it sounds narrow. I'm sorry if it sounds parochial. I'm completely open to the resources of this community being used for everybody else's benefit, so long as their resources are also available for everybody else's benefit. The simple basis or the principle on the basis of which you operate is reciprocity. I will do to you what you will do to me. Is this unreasonable? Is this illogical? Am I saying something that is communal? Am I saying something that is fascist? Am I saying something that is bigoted? Logic is perhaps the better way to approach a proposition as opposed to emotion and rhetoric. So I'm merely testing the validity of my proposition on the basis of logic. These are questions which you have to ask. Tirupati, with its resources, is it capable of not investing in free education, free basic education for members of the Hindu community, at least in Tirupati? Is it possible or not? It's possible. Then what stops it from investing those resources in them, in the community? When you know for a fact that conversion is on the rise in and around those districts, and money is a problem as far as people living in that particular area is concerned, is it not possible for this particular institution, which is supposed to be the richest temple in the world, or the richest religious institution in the world, to invest in the community? But does it have a say in who can use its resources? The institution has no say. Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam had a separate act before 1987. Post 1987, when the HRC legislation of Andhra Pradesh was amended, pursuant to recommendations by Justice Challakondaya Committee, the TTD administration was merged with the HRC administration. And there is a specific chapter that deals with it. Anybody who thinks that this legislation is only meant to regulate and restrict and to ensure that there is no corruption fails to realize that wherever there is state, there is bound to be corruption. That is the reality. Are you telling me that state as an institution whose corruption is there for you to see on a daily basis in every newspaper is the single institution in which you will put your faith with respect to the resources of your community? Doesn't make sense at all. When tens and thousands of crores of rupees are involved, are you saying that the Indian state, regardless of whoever is in power, whichever party is in power, is capable of running that institution without corruption? Is that even possible? Yes or no? The second largest owner of real estate in this country is the church. Please tell me, do you think it is impossible for any kind of corrupt dealings in the church when it comes to the kind of land it holds? Is it inconceivable? Yes or no? It is possible, right? Does the state choose to interfere with the activities of the church citing corruption? Then why is it that you choose to make an example only out of this community, as if corruption is peculiar only to this community? There are close to 39,000 temples in the state of Tamil Nadu alone. And there are over 400 temples which have been notified by UNESCO as places of heritage, world heritage, global heritage. Out of these 39 temples, 38,265 temples are under government control. So is this the assumption that 38,265 temples require the presence of the state? And do you know what is the income of these places? Less than 10,000 a year. That is less than 800 rupees a month. What corruption are you talking of in an institution that can't even earn 800 rupees a month? What business does an executive officer or the state officer have in such an institution? If the state chooses to appoint people who shall be the trustees of the board, can you call it an independent institution? Is there a distinction between appointment and election? Yes or no? Election would mean community participation. Yes or no? Appointment would mean zero community participation. Yes or no? Your trustees are appointed. They are not elected. Trustees of every other institution, of every other faith are elected. The Gurudwara elects its own trustees. The Waqf elects its own trustees. I want parity in treatment. I want equality in treatment. The Supreme Court is so obsessed with equality these days. I'm asking for equality in treatment. I'm asking for the same equality to be applied as far as this group of institutions are concerned. How many of you are aware of the fact that temple at one point of time used to be the institution for lending money, used to function as a bank? The trade guilds were established from within temples. It is important to reinforce the centrality of this institution called temple in the lives of people. Not to make them religious, but to at least make them cultural to some extent. Tomorrow, the government decides that notwithstanding the fact that this is a privately run institution, we will tell you how you're supposed to run your place. Would that be acceptable to you as far as this particular institution is concerned? If it is not acceptable to you when it comes to a private institution such as this hostel, which is run by a certain community, how are we so comfortable with the state interfering with our temples? How is the example any different? How is the situation any different? The temple at the end of the day is more than a religious institution in the life of an average Hindu. Have you ever wondered why is it that this institution and communities associated with this institution have been the subject of repetitive attacks whenever there's been an invasion or whenever there have been attempts at conversions? Because at least to the person who is a non-Hindu, he has identified that this is the institution that plays a central role in the lives of an average Hindu. So if you choose to go after this nerve center, if you choose to go after this particular institution that plays a vital role, it is bound to have a domino effect on the community. The strategy as far as India is concerned has been no different from the African experience. Demonize indigenous traditions, call them the devil, call them the Satan, shame them when it comes to their traditions and beliefs. And when the cup is empty and it has been emptied of local thought, you fill it with foreign thought. When your house help needs money, or when your security guard needs money, or when your driver needs money, please realize he is in that vulnerable position where he has opened himself up for predatory proselytization and conversion. Because you're never in that shoes, you're never in that situation, you're never in that circumstance. It is easy for you to say, how can he convert for the sake of a few thousand rupees? For him, it is important. Only when temples choose to dedicate their resources for the benefit of the community and they invest in the community, they will strengthen the community from within. There is no point in blaming the outsider or someone who doesn't belong to your faith as long as there are weaknesses within your own community. You can blame the thief for having the intent of entering your house, but keeping your house open without a lock is your problem, it's your mistake. And it's your stupidity. So if you need resources to ensure that people are educated, that they don't struggle to provide at least basic education to their own children, you need resources, but your resources are in whose control? State control. And that is precisely why you need to free Hindu institutions from state control. So when somebody tells me this discussion of this topic is perhaps an elitist topic which is meant for the high-flying members of the society who sit in an air-conditioned room, they don't realize that the beneficiaries of this particular goal will ultimately be the middle-class Hindu, the low-middle-class Hindu, and Hindus who live below the poverty line. But whenever I ask this question, I have a few questions that come from the other side. What if the state leaves? Who will take care of our own institutions? So who is taking care of this institution? The state. Does the state conduct your Ganesh Chaturthi pandals and all that? Or even during Dashera? You have local communities which choose to pool in resources, which choose to hold their own festivals and their own functions. That is the innate spirit of this land. Self-reliance is the innate spirit of this land. License permit Raj is the invention of the Congress, but that's not the innate spirit of this country. So if you're capable of running or conducting these functions, is it not possible for the community to take care of its own institutions? The community can perhaps choose to say, we will also take care of members of other communities, but that is a decision that you will take based on your consent. It is not for the state to say, you give your money to this particular entity or this particular community. The Sabarimala case, as far as I'm concerned, is perhaps the encroachment of the state, not just in the secular aspects of the administration of the temple, but now the state is also interfering with the religious aspects of the temple. When I visited Sabarimala in 98, I was 13. I would have never guessed that in 20 years, I would face a situation where Sabarimala would be the center of such an ugly controversy. In a span of 13 years, this is the change. This is the pace at which things have changed. Sabarimala, at the very least, has a recorded history of 300 years. At the very least. So something which has survived for over 300 years stands set aside today by judicial intervention. In one fell swoop, it's gone. But we are trying to revive it. We'll see what can be done. Whether or not they understand the practice of that particular temple, they have chosen to impose equality in the most unequal manner possible, in the most discriminatory manner possible. Why do you think Sabarimala is under such intense attack? Any idea? That is the one place where, regardless of the background you come from, you bond, you're together, and you subscribe to one rigid Sattvic practice. And when you go there, Sabarimala, if its tradition were to be hijacked or if it were to be destroyed, I can't think of any other religious institution within the Hindu fold which will survive a similar attack. Because that is one place where there is no caste identity. That is one place which is free of any unch neech kind of thought. And if that institution is attacked and that institution succumbs, what will survive next? You have to ask yourself, which is the institution that is on the radar next? So when you look at this institution or this issue, please do not limit it to this narrow question of gender equality or gender discrimination. It goes beyond that. There are any number of Christians from Kerala who support the temple's practice of Sabarimala. Men from their own families have gone to the temple and their women have taken an active interest in that particular practice. But it is Hindus from all over the world who are now asking for entry of women, citing equality. When I visited Sabarimala in 98, in a span of 13 years, this is the change. Dahi Handi is out on its way. Firecrackers during Diwali is out on its way. God knows what else will find an exit option. This is the pace at which things have changed. Change is constant and change is good. That's what Bhagavad Gita says. But you have to decide whether it is change for the good or change for the worse. That's the question as a society you have to ask yourself. And this goes back to a fundamental problem. As long as you think of yourself as an individual, and as long as you think of yourself as an island who's untouched by the developments which are outside your control, this will be the problem. At some point, this community needs to make a decision, needs to take a stand. Will we be silent spectators to this rapid tide of change without even offering so much as a resistance, without even asking questions, without even holding people to account? So the other day I was talking to my cousin who's very candid and outspoken. So I asked him, do his friends call themselves spiritual but not religious? Do they call themselves atheists? Because on Facebook, this is a very popular status these days, spiritual but not religious. So I asked him, what do you think of all of this? I heard an unusually mature opinion from him. Unusual because I didn't expect it to come from that age group. He said, no, most people actually have it only because it's cool. Apart from the fact that since their parents have not taken an interest in teaching them their own traditions, they have no clue as to where they come from and what their roots are. So they automatically subscribe to the comfortable notion of atheism as opposed to subscribing to something whose logic they don't understand. The point I'm trying to make is, one generation or two generations have already made the mistake of not passing on their traditions and roots to their children. If it continues at this rate, all in the name of liberalism, they'll do what they wish to do. I leave it entirely to their own devices. You will find a situation where 80% of this country has opened itself up to all sorts of influences from outside, good, bad, and ugly. And you will have absolutely no control over how the society changes subsequently. And there will come a point where you'll ask yourself, how did this come about? I went to Israel recently. Think of the Israeli society as a society with concentric circles. At the core is the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. The next ring is the Orthodox Jewish community. Then comes the conservative Jew. Imagine ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, and then you have the conservative Jew. And then you have the secular Jew. And on the outer fringe is perhaps the atheists. But the one thing that I was surprised and astounded by is the shared sense of Jewish heritage and pride in Jewish heritage that each of these people have, regardless of which ring they are in. Can you say the same thing about a secular Hindu and a conservative Hindu as far as India is concerned? You will not be in a position to say this because he is so far removed and his level of guilt is so high that he'll perhaps be the first person to spit on his own roots compared to the outsider, so to speak, or someone who's outside the faith. Do you find it wrong if I say that only Hindu employees must work in Hindu institutions? I'm not saying only Hindu employees must work in state institutions, but at the very least, I have a right to say in Hindu institutions only Hindus should work and they should benefit. Or would you use even secularism to say even that is a bigoted position? Is it possible for a Hindu to become a minority welfare minister? Is it possible for a Hindu who professes and practices the Hindu faith to become the head of a Waqf board? Do you have absolutely any say in how the bishop or the diocese chooses to deal with the property of the Christian community? If these basic questions are bigoted, and it is the Hindu who sees this position as bigoted, I pity him because he is digging his own grave or her own grave. Unfortunately, if I were to raise these questions before members of other communities, take it from me that I will find more acceptance from them, because then I'll say, you interfere with me, I will interfere with you. So they will immediately say, you stay within your own territory. But it is the Hindu who will be the first person to object to my position. So there is no point in blaming anybody else. There is a problem with your indoctrination. There is a problem in the manner in which you've been brainwashed for generations. Unfortunately, this community is in deep slumber. It has slept for long enough. God knows what is the reason for the slumber. We keep sleeping over and over again when it comes to these institutions. Since these questions have not been raised over the last 2 generations, people like me have had to step up. And since nobody has asked the question for the last 2 generations, that status quo has become acceptable. So when I ask these questions, I look like the idiot. Why is he asking these questions? Nobody is bothered to ask these questions. We're perfectly comfortable with the situation. What you don't realize is real estate means presence. Presence means visibility. Visibility means you exist. When you don't exist, when you're out of the public eye, you've effectively been relegated to the margins. Your ignorance with respect to your own traditions is going to be used against you to humiliate you, to shame you, to call you a patriarch, to call you a chauvinist, to call you whatnot, until a point comes where you would have decided to give up your identity altogether. Whatever is happening around you is not a struggle for resources, but it is a struggle for identity. Any number of people would say, but why is identity so important? Look at China, look at America. Then you have not understood their history. America believes in manifest destiny. It believes that it has a destiny to lord over the world, so to speak. That it has a destiny which facilitates pursuit of happiness. That is the identity they've imputed to themselves. China subscribes to the Middle Kingdom concept. What about India? We fail to realize the sheer privilege that we enjoy after generations of living in one unified territory from Himalayas to the south. This is something that even Chandragupta Maurya could not achieve, despite having a Chanakya by his side. This is something that Samudragupta could not achieve. This is something that even the Mughals could not achieve. As long as your identity exists, this entity exists in the way it exists. The day your identity is eviscerated and your identity is hijacked, India as it exists today, despite all its flaws, will cease to exist. So whenever I discuss or give a talk on this topic, I'm asked, what can we do as people? What can we do? How do we contribute? It's not necessary for you to always think big. There are certain things that most people can do within their own circumstances, which is completely within their control. So I'm giving you 3 options. If you're running an institution or you're an entrepreneur, is it not possible for you to ensure that people who work for you are taken care of and they participate in your festivals and they're made to feel part of this system and this ecosystem and the Hindu fold? I'm talking of your Hindu employees at the very least. You don't need to impose your faith on anybody else. Is it not possible for you to ensure that when they're struggling for money, they don't go to some institution that says that I'm willing to offer you money provided you change your faith? Is that not within your control? Indic Renaissance, in its most lucid terms, in perhaps the most simplest of terms possible, is an urge, a plea to each of you members to take an active interest in the affairs of your community, to take an active interest in your own traditions and to make sure that you pass on the traditions that you have got, which is perhaps a fraction of what your parents had. At least that fraction must go to your children, at the very least. Don't blame the schools for their education, because then you're effectively saying that schools are responsible for upbringing, we're only responsible for conception and delivery. You've had the child, so the children are yours. They are not the wards of the state. So as far as teaching is concerned, don't limit it or exclusively to the schools. Take an active interest in what is it that your child is learning. If textbooks are teaching nonsense and parents don't take an interest, they will assume that parents also endorse that nonsense. And if that brainwashing starts at this age, he will have absolutely no problems with anybody interfering with the Hindu institution. So there is only a point to which you can constantly blame others for your own mistakes, your own weakness, and your own inability to stand up for your traditions. But you can't stand up for your own traditions because you don't know your own traditions. Do not treat any of these talks as pastimes. I'm asking you to take ownership of at least one initiative, something that you believe in, and throw your weight behind it. If you're interested in reviving a certain art form, please see how is it that you can contribute to it. At the very least, take an interest in the temple which is in your locality and ask yourself who is running it. What is the level of state interference in it? Where does the money in the hundi go? Ask these questions. These are basic questions. This is doable. Not one suggestion that I've given is unreasonable. It doesn't require a stretch of your resources or imagination. It only requires you to put your money where your mouth is. So the next time you choose to whine about dharma, or you choose to whine about your religion, or you choose to whine about how the Indian state is hypocritical or is discriminatory towards Hindus, just ask yourself, have you taken at least one step? Have you contributed at least one brick to changing the status quo? If you have done nothing, I must say this bluntly, you do not have the right to whine. Under Article 19 or Article 14 or Article 21 or any of the free speech rights, while you have the freedom to speak and the freedom to express, we have unfortunately translated it to freedom to whine endlessly. This has become the nature of our society. So at the very least, anyone who seems to be a person of resources rushes to an ashram for salvation, God knows for what reason. I have to put this point. I have to say this. I'm sorry if I'm offending a lot of people. I'm simply paraphrasing what Vivekananda has said. You do not have a right to seek individual salvation when the rest of your society is struggling. You have not arrived at a phase where each of you can start going towards salvation. Go to any number of ashrams, patronize any number of babas, no problem, but come back to the temple. Because no matter which Baba comes and which Baba goes, the temple has to remain, it shall remain. It is your responsibility to ensure that it remains for eternity. Put your faith in any number of people. I won't use this phrase called Godman because according to me that's wrong. No problem. But the source is the temple. The root is the temple. The Gangotri is the temple. All of them derive their knowledge only from the temple and from the knowledge that has come from the temple. So whether they attribute their knowledge and their success to the temple or not, at least you should know where they draw their knowledge from. So my request to you would be, perhaps one generation has to swallow this poison pill for the next generation to continue calling itself practitioners of the Sanatana Dharma. In a democracy, what happens is, it is meant to give you the freedom to pursue your own goals, your own, let's say, dreams. But it also, unfortunately, gives you the luxury of passing on your duty to the next generation. I can't do it, somebody else will do it. And as a consequence, what you have handed over as legacy to the next generation is a set of problems which only keeps growing by the day. A set of identity-related challenges which only keeps piling up by the day. So the hope is, at least in my generation, we'll reduce the burden for the next generation, if not eliminate it. Help us by helping yourself. Take an active interest in the people around you. I'm sure at the very least, you can influence 5 people in your circles. I'm not asking you to convert. I'm asking you to tell them what you stand for. If somebody spits against your faith or your community in front of you, the very least you can do is to speak up and stand up for your community, as opposed to keeping your mouth shut out of some misplaced sense of politeness. Politeness is not in keeping your mouth shut when somebody is spewing venom against your faith. It's as good or as bad as respecting a friendship where the friend is actually spitting at your parents and you don't want to hurt the friend's sentiments. It's as stupid as that. Are you going to choose your parents over your friends? That is the question that you have to ask yourself. This is the simplest example that I can at least offer. Go back to the basics. Read Aurobindo, read Swami Vivekananda, read Madan Mohan Malviya, read K.M. Munshi, read Ambedkar. Do read him. I haven't found one intellectual in the last 60 years who comes anywhere close to his clarity of thought. He's one of the sterling individuals that we have produced. Whatever his angst may have been against certain scriptures, that was a product of the circumstances he was brought up in and the product of the circumstances he lived in. But remember, he never chose to convert outside the dharmic fold. He never chose to convert to any other faith despite all the incentives that were offered to him. He tried his best to ensure that caste discrimination and untouchability were reduced. And when he realized that he couldn't succeed, he went to the closest option available that allows him to remain within the fold, which is Buddhism. He did not convert to any other faith. So anybody who uses Ambedkar to divide this community is a motivated, useful idiot in the hands of those who have an agenda. He's useful for them and he's an idiot for me. So therefore, he's a useful idiot. So my request to you would be, as opposed to offering sweets to each other on festive occasions, distribute books. Make sure that people are aware of their roots. Community participation or community celebration of festivals is important. The very least that you must develop over a point of time is the power of argumentation. But you need information before you argue. So try and equip yourself with as much information as possible. When your child asks you the reason for a certain practice, at least admit that you don't know and try to answer the question the next time he asks you the question. As opposed to saying this is some superstition. Merely because you know nothing, it can't be superstition. That is not the definition of superstition as far as I know it. So my request to you would be, if you can't think of the society, let's be Indians and be selfish. Think of yourself, think of your family, think of your children, and for their own sake, take an active interest in protecting your traditions.
This video was very eye-opening, and I agree with what he's saying. The temples should be freed. We cannot take any single step without funds. The government should free Hindu temples, as it is not fair to Hindus. That is something we should be protesting on a daily basis until we get justice. We are not demanding something special or getting anything out of this. The only thing we are getting is equal rights. We have lots of people, but with no funding, this is where the development stops for Hindus. How will we help the next generation if we cannot grow? If we are not growing, we are dying. That is the ultimate truth. Okay guys, well that's it. Please understand how important this is to our survival. See you in the next video. Ram Ram.